So now, without further ado, let's get into our training. Teresa, can you please take it away?
Thank you so much for that introduction. And as we just said, I'm Teresa Tudor with the Department of Human Services, and I have had the privilege of being involved with the state's GATA efforts pretty much from the start, and have heard lots of questions from current grantees as well as from entities wanting to partner with the state. So I'm excited to be able to share some of those lessons learned and knowledge from grantees and from folks that want to partner with the state. And I want to stress that it's a partnership. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this today, and will continue to be available to assist community efforts to come on board with us, because we know, without our partners at the community level, that's where the work really takes place. I know as someone coming from, human services and having a passion for making sure that we make a difference in the lives of individuals and families, I know I can't do that without all of you. My job's to support the work that you do. So I bring that attitude and that passion to today's training. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. I want to make sure that you get the information that you need to be successful. So let's start with just some basics about what is GATA. Just to put up front, GATA stands for the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act. So when I say GATA, and anyone else on this webinar refers to GATA, that's what we're referring to. It's an act. It's legislation that turned into a public act. So it provides the uniform standards for all state awards and for all state agencies. It's something that we have been working on implementing and improving every year as we move further and further into this process, with the goal that it was set out to improve performance and to ensure transparency. And what I mean by that is, we want to be successful as a state in what we do and the services that we provide. And so with those consistent standards, that helps us move us towards that. And then to be transparent. You'll see in just a few minutes how you can use the state website to see what grant awards are out there. So it's not a secret, what's coming up for funding opportunities, and who gets the awards. All of that, I think for a true partnership, we have to have that transparency. So let's learn a little bit more about GATA. As I mentioned, it is an act in Illinois, but it really stems from the work that is required for federal awards. And that's important to note, because if you are setting up your agency or reviewing your current structure and your current policies and processes to align with GATA, then you're going to be in a perfect position not only to get state funding, but also to be in accordance with the federal regulations, specifically 2 CFR 200. So that's a win-win, that you will have the opportunity perhaps to see some federal funding that is made available, and you'll be ready for that. But likewise, you'll also be in a great position to discover what type of state awards are available, and then to already be qualified to do that. So let's talk a little bit more about what it takes to be qualified. Let me back up just 1 second before I do that. I'm going to reinforce again, because I know sometimes people are like, oh, why do we have to go by all these regulations? So I think it's important to pause and to acknowledge the benefits of GATA. I know in the past, I've worked with community organizations for a long time, and some of our grantees would say, how come I have to do this for your agency, and then I got to turn around and submit the same thing for another agency, or even within DHS, feeling like it's, people are asking for the same thing. It's like, can't you just take the information that we had before, or can't you just access, what we've done? It feels like double work to me. And so GATA really helps with streamlining the process from application to year-end reporting. And so what you're doing for one agency has the benefit of carrying over to other programs or other state grant awards and even other state agencies. So we're really trying to cut down on that redundancy, because redundancy means extra time on your part, extra time on our part. So it's a win-win for both of us to do that. And how do we reduce some of that redundancy? Well, it's uniform processes across the grant making process. And that's from the point of application. So when you look at what's called a notice of funding opportunity or a NOFO, you're going to see similarities, whether you're looking at one from my program area or one from Wendy's program areas or even another state agency, because we're all following within 2 CFR 200. There's an appendix that spells out exactly which sections have to be covered. And for you as a community provider, I think that makes it easier, because once you kind of figure out how to prepare, how to develop a grant application in response to a NOFO, you may just be able to sub in and out some core information in order to make it relevant to each grant opportunity. So that is helpful for you. The budget template, the uniform grant budget is going to be the same across agencies. How you submit it may be different, but the elements, the budget lines are going to be the same, because again, that's dictated by regulation. So it makes it easier for if you have new fiscal folks or you're new to this process, you're going to see that consistency across state grant awards. And then even the grant agreement language. Most of a uniform grant agreement, or a UGA as we call it, is going to be exactly the same until you get to things like exhibits, which are specific to each program award and specific to each grantee, in fact. So all of that rolls up to the very end of a grant making cycle, so that the year-end report is going to be consistent or standardized across awards. And one of the reasons that we do all this, and it's a benefit because it acknowledges that, partnering with the state and being responsible to deliver services can be difficult. There can be some risk involved in doing that. And what we want is for us as the state entity responsible for the services that are delivered, and you as the community organization that does the work, we want to partner together to reduce any risk. So part of the process is determining that risk up front and figuring out solutions on how to reduce that risk. So those overall are probably the key benefits. There's more, but those are the highlights. So what I want to do now is walk you through how to apply for a state grant. Again, most of it's going to be consistent across state agencies. So the terminology, the steps, once you do them, it's going to help you position yourself to be ready for when one comes available. And I can't stress enough to get ready now. Grant making season typically starts in the spring, but you definitely do not want to wait to the spring to get ready. Better to be pre-qualified now. And then when a funding opportunity comes up, you're ready to jump on it. I've shared this example several times before because it's near and dear to my heart. I have 2 daughters that played softball. Well, actually, they played a lot of sports, but softball was the one that comes to mind as they continue that with high school and college careers. And I think, and both of them were great athletes, but that doesn't matter. You can't be sitting on the bench saying, "Oh, put me in coach." Because you'll never even get to being on the team unless you do the things that are required. You do the prep work that's necessary. So whether that's as simple as making sure, the annual physicals were done, the right equipment was available, showing up for practice, all of those things happen long before the game starts. And that's what I'm focusing on now, is what needs to be done in order for you to be ready before the game starts. So we're going to talk about how to find funding opportunities, but even more importantly, we're going to talk about how to pre-qualify, because that needs to be done before you send in that application. I'll also spend a few minutes on risk assessments, what they're for, how to access them, and how they influence grant awards. And then lastly, we'll talk about completing a funding opportunity notice. So let's get started. So there isn't at this point in time an email blast that comes out where you can just, here you go, and you'll be notified every time that there's a grant award. That's an awesome goal for us to reach, but we're not there right now. But there is just as easy of a way for you to find out yourself, and that's going to this website here called the Catalog of State Financial Assistance. This is a part of the GATA website. And so you can go here to find out literally every funding award in the state. So I encourage you, that's the place you want to start, is to find out what's out there. And you can search for funding opportunities in several ways. You can click to see a list of current funding opportunities. You can pull up state agencies to see what type of programs they're currently funding. And then you can also go back and look at existing grant programs. They may not be up for competitive responses right now, but I always think that's a great way to get ahead of things. Like if I wanted to be ready for the next time a NOFO comes out, because typically you'll have the first year where it's competitive, and there'll be a renewal year 2 and 3. Now, there's some deviation from that. Sometimes we need to do it more often because maybe there's a gap in our statewide service delivery. But that's pretty much the pattern that you're going to see most consistently across grant awards, is 1-year competition and then renewal years. So if I know there's a program that's going to come up for competition a year from now, I'm going to spend time pulling up the old information to see, what did they ask for last time? You know, what types of things need to be pulled together, whether that be information or maybe collaborations. There's a lot of grants where you may need to show that you're working with other organizations in your community. And doing that when the notice comes out, which is going to be posted 30 to 60 days, that's frankly probably too late. You want to get those partnerships in line long before the NOFO comes about. So that's one way to use this website to get ahead. Now, if I pull up searching for the notices of funding opportunities, it's going to look like this. So you'll see on the left where the opportunity title is there, and the state agency that is offering, or that the grant funds are running through, how long the application date it's open, and then about how much money is available. And that may influence your decision as to whether this is going to work for your agency, whether it's something you want to invest the time and the resources into developing an application response. Now, certainly once you click on the opportunity title, that's going to give you a much more comprehensive look at that program. And you can learn about it and see, is that something that we think we could deliver? Is that something that matches up with my agency's experience or the mission? Because those are important factors in determining which ones to go for, because all grants are not good grants for everybody. Here's another way of searching where you're pulling it up by agency. The numbers that you see there at the end, like for human services, for us, 444, when you respond to a NOFO, you're going to see it start out with probably the fiscal year. So now it would be 22-444, so it's with human services. And then you would see 2 more numbers that go with the division. And then lastly, whether it's the first NOFO of the year that goes with that particular one. So looking at this screen, you know, when you see the amount of active awards, and you compare that also with how many grant awards might come out when you pull this up, that gives you an idea of, does it seem like we'd have a chance to be funded on this? Are they giving out 30 grant awards, or is this one of those where it's a much more narrow field and maybe only 2 grant awards will be given? Again, information that can help inform your decision as to whether you should apply or not. All right, so now you know how to find out where the opportunities are. But like I said, before you start searching, I encourage you to make sure that you've completed these 5 steps, because that's, you know, that's the having the annual physical, that's the practice, that's the having the right equipment. Here's where we start. 5 steps. The first one, the Federal Employer Identification Number. This is something that when it comes to the steps to the process of pre-qualification, this is easy, instantly is done. You're applying online and it's free. So if you get on a website and they're offering their services and it's going to cost, whatever amount of dollars it is, you're on the wrong website, because this process is 100% free and you'll be able to complete this step in no time at all. So that's great. Now the next step is your DUNS number, or your Data Universal Numbering System. Another one of those that you can do right online. It doesn't take much time. Generally, you'll finish this step in one day. And again, it's free. Now, the reason we're going in this order is in order to get the next step, which is the SAMS account, you have to have a DUNS number. And before you get to registering in the GATA Grantee Portal, you have to have this step completed. So this isn't an arbitrary order. We're really trying to make sure that you're following steps that make it easy for you to move forward. If you're not familiar with securing a DUNS number, here's the kind of information that you're going to need to gather up. It doesn't matter who you choose in your organization to sign up for the account, but you want to make sure that you have all these pieces of information so you can get on, do it in one setting with the online application and complete it out. So legal name of the business, address, phone number, knowing exactly who is the CEO or owner of the business. What year was the entity created? What do you determine is your primary line of business, and generally the total number of employees? That's the kind of information that you need. And so you might think about, who in my organization does it make the most amount of sense for them to be linked to this account? And that's true with any of these legal things that you want to go through. Is it best to be the president of the board? Is it best to be the CEO or owner of the business? That again is an agency decision. So in order to be ready, when I get online, what kind of information am I going to need? That's important. So let's start with the next step, getting a SAMS account. This is a federal or US government website. So you're going to notice that in the URL address. It is free as well, so very similar to what we talked about with the FEAN and the DUNS number, but here's where the difference comes in. This takes a little bit longer. The website currently tells you it's going to take 10 business days, but past experience tells us that it can take longer than that. So, my suggestion is start that early. Unfortunately, we have found that sometimes once a NOFO is posted, especially if it's posted on the 30-day notice, entities struggle to get all of this done in time. So start now, even if you don't have any idea whether you want to go for a particular state grant award, because it may take some time. And this is also the first thing that has to be done annually. So even if you have a current SAMS account, be sure that you tend to that and it's taken care of every year that it is current. Same type of tips here in terms of what do you need in order to get a SAMS account. And again, some of those steps we already did. You need your FEAN number or your tax identification number is another term that folks use to refer to that. That you have your DUNS number, that you have your legal business name. And you want some consistency with each of these accounts, right? So, and that hangs community agencies up sometimes, that maybe you have changed your name, or maybe you're known in the community by a certain name, but that's not necessarily your legal business name. That's the kind of information that's important to make sure you have in sync and it's consistent across these different types of accounts. Okay. Another one that you can do online, and that you also need to make sure that you tend to on an annual basis. So there is a fee that goes along with having the good standing with the Secretary of State. And it's something that, again, you want to make sure that you stay on top of. But there are a few exceptions with entities that do not have to be registered with the Secretary of State. Typically, it's a government entity or a school. But there are some other exceptions. Sometimes a very old program or organization, I should say, that has been exempt from doing that. But for the most part, unless you're a government entity or a school, you're going to need to be registered with the Secretary of State, and you're going to need to keep that registration current and in good standing. And you do that by filing an annual report and taking care of the annual fee. Lastly, and this is what gets you directly linked to the state award system, and that's the GATA Grantee Portal. You have to be registered in that. It's very easy to create an account, and in fact, the website gives you, you can pull down a PDF document that walks you through how to create an account. And it's going to look, when you get to that page, it's going to look like this. Very easy to navigate. All right, so that's how you get pre-qualified. You have completed the 5 steps. That's what we call pre-qualification. The next piece with risk assessment, there's another term we use for that, and that's a pre-award. So a pre-award means that it has to be done before a state agency can issue a uniform grant agreement or a grant. So one of the things you want to make sure that you do, I know there's a lot of focus on, okay, I'm pre-qualified, I've sent in my application, we have an awesome application, thumbs up, we're done. Actually, I'm going to encourage you, if in the notice of funding opportunity, it provides the link to the programmatic risk assessment, go ahead and get that done as soon as possible. That way you'll be ready if you're successful in applying for a grant. Same thing with the fiscal or administrative risk assessment. But first, let me talk about why do we have that? Because this tends to be, I've talked to organizations that haven't received funding before, and they've been concerned, I'm afraid that if I say we don't have experience with this, or maybe we don't have these controls in place, or, we've had some turnover in our staff recently, or whatever the issue may be, they're concerned that if they're honest with the questionnaires, that will knock them out of competition. So I want to be really clear about why we use risk assessments. True, we want to identify where there's some potential areas of risk, but that's not to put your application in the no-go file. That's just for what it helps you know, okay, here's some areas we might need to invest in, or here's some parts of our organizational structure we might need to shore up a little bit. And that's okay. And it also tells us as a state entity where you might need some extra support or technical assistance. And for example, you could say that this webinar is in response to that. It's giving you some needed supports and technical assistance, so you know exactly what needs to be done. That's the kind of help we're talking about. So the risk assessments, go in line again with the federal requirements. It's lined out in 2 CFR 200 that we must, with federal funds and then through the Grant Accountability Transparency Act, with state funds as well, so we're in compliance with 2 CFR 200, that we do a fiscal and a programmatic risk. 2 different risk assessments. It's important to note that. You have to make sure you get both of those done. The first one is the Internal Controls Questionnaire, or ICQ. That is one that is done at the organizational level. So whether you're applying for a grant or a current grantee that gets 1 grant award or 10 grant awards, there's 1 ICQ. And now that's different than a programmatic risk assessment or a PRA. And as the name implies, the risk assessment is tied to a specific program. And so that's why you are asked to do and to complete a PRA for every single grant award that you apply for. Again, these links to the risk assessments should be right up front in the NOFO. If you don't find that information, or you have trouble, clicking on the link and getting through, there's always in every notice of funding opportunity a contact person. And so that person can help you get the links or the access to those sites. So let's talk a little bit more about the ICQ, or the Internal Controls Questionnaire. Once you've registered in the grantee portal, whomever you've determined as the authorized representative for your organization, they're going to be sent a link to the ICQ. Now, you can choose whether you're going to complete it at the time or not. But again, to get ahead of the game, I would suggest that as soon as you're registered in the grantee portal and you get this link, go ahead and do the ICQ. Now, it's possible that you may have to do 2 separate ICQs before you apply for a grant award. For example, let's say you decide to go for a grant award in January. Well, typically the updated internal controls questionnaire is available in the spring. So let's say you completed the ICQ in January, you successfully submit an application. It was able to be reviewed because you're pre-qualified. But then your ICQ is linked to the current fiscal year, not the upcoming fiscal year. So in the spring, when the new one becomes available, you'll need to do an updated one. And again, your program staff who are monitoring the grant awards or supporting applicants will let you know all that information. And even if you have done one and you have done it in the past, this has to be done every year. Now, who in your organization is in the best position to do this? The person who has the most knowledge about your finances, about your administration, about your organizational experience, and specifically accounting, because that's the type of questions that are going to be asked in the ICQ. No matter what type of grant you're applying for, the fiscal and administrative controls are so important, because you may have an awesome history of delivering a program, but maybe there's some areas, because you haven't received grant funds before from the state, that need to be shored up in order to be successful. Because it's one thing to be able to deliver the program, and it's another to have the organizational capacity to respond to grant awards, and both are equally important. So here's some of the areas, actually these are all the areas or components of the ICQ. So you can see it really is looking at all of those factors that may influence whether you're going to be able to successfully deliver what the program asks for. So we're looking at procurement standards, and that's true whether you are planning on purchasing things with the state grant award funding. Same thing with the subrecipient monitoring and management. You may not be thinking about passing funds through and establishing a subrecipient relationship, but we assess for that anyways. Things could change. And again, that's part of the organizational capacity and ability to be successful with state grant awards. So these are the areas that we're looking at. And there could be, right now there's about 70 questions total for the ICQ. Some areas have more questions than others. But in total, again, if you have a person from your agency that's knowledgeable with the finances and the administrative functions of your agency, this shouldn't be difficult at all to complete. Now, you access this, like I said, after receiving the link from the GATA grantee portal. It's done at the organizational level, not at the program level. The program risk assessment, now that's a little bit different. The program risk assessment is specifically tied to a specific grant award. And so that's not going to be on the GATA grantee portal at this point in time. That's going to be determined by the specific agency that's offering the grant award and by the specific program area. Here you see a picture of one of our divisions, the Family Community Services, and we post ours on a table on the DHS website. And as you can see to the right, there is a link that will take you to the PRA that's associated with the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program. That's how we let potential applicants, as well as current grantees, because remember, this is something that's done annually, know how to access it. And in our case with DHS, you can complete it online. Other state agencies may do it differently. They may have an attachment that has the programmatic risk assessment, and you complete that and you include that in your application. If they're asking for or giving you that information at the point of application. But again, remember, this is something that is done not as a part of pre-qualification, but a part of the pre-award activities. Just like the ICQ, it's looking at organizational, it's looking at capacity, but in the area of programs. So it might be looking at policies and procedures, or the way that you deliver your services. Your history of delivering, in this case, the teen pregnancy program. Maybe you've been doing something like that for years, but you haven't gotten state funding to support that. And so this assessment's going to help with determining whether that's a strong suit for you, or whether there's some areas where you might need some additional support or technical assistance. Now, let's say there's areas of risk that are flagged. That can happen. You could have medium or even high risk areas. And that doesn't knock you out of partnering with the state, but it may lead to some special conditions or specific conditions. And so those are things that may be added to your grant award that you will be required to follow through on in order to continue to get a grant. So this is after you've already successfully made it through the merit-based review process. Your scores were such that you are indeed a successful candidate to receive a state grant award. But there's some areas of risk. So we want to make sure that we've got some things spelled out. In order to partner with us, this is what the expectation is. So it's really important to know what those are up front, and we're very transparent about that. When we use the state system to generate the uniform grant agreements or notify you of the state award, you're going to be told up front what those special or specific conditions are. And you can say, yep, this is fine. I appreciate the support. It's going to work for me. Or you can say, no, this doesn't work. I don't think we can do this. Maybe now's not the time to get this grant award. And that's totally up to you. You have the choice to sign off on the agreement or not. Now, what might some of those special conditions look like? Well, it could be as simple as instead of having something turned in quarterly, like other grantees are doing, the program area might ask you to report on a monthly basis, or it may ask for more detailed or backup information. It could say, you know what, this is the first time you've received a state grant award, so I'm going to schedule a site visit or a virtual site visit for many programs right now within the first 3 months. So that way we get a chance to meet and talk through the expectations of the grant. The program staff are going to be available to walk you through, what might seem a little complicated, but really isn't once you have a chance to learn more about what's expected. I know in the past, I've had some grantees that, because some risk that was flagged, I may require them to go through a specific training. Like, for example, we have an awesome online training that covers everything from the application process all the way through the end of the year reporting, any financial reporting that's required. And so I could put as a special condition that I want the grantee to complete that, or key personnel to complete that. And there's other things. It depends on the program area. But for the most part, I've not heard, my experience has been, I haven't heard much pushback from grantees saying, oh, I think that's unfair, or I'm not sure how to do that. Because again, the idea of having risk assessment and having special conditions is to set us both up to be successful. Before I leave risk assessments, let me just stress, these are pre-award requirements. You have to do them on an annual basis. For the ICQ, It's one and done. So whether you are applying and partnering with the state on 1 grant or 10 grants, you just do it one time. But for the programmatic risk assessment, you do it annually on every program. And again, the benefit of the pre-qualification is that no matter where you're searching for state funding, it's the same path. Our NOFOs are going to look very similar because we all follow the appendix in how we set them up. The pre-qualifications, the 5 steps I talked about, those are required for all state agencies. All right, so now it's time for get the grant award out there. It may only be, the notice may only be up for 30 to 60 days, or it could even be one that's an open-ended one. But typically most are up for a specific amount of time for posting. We have to do this. We have to, unless we are granted an exception, and that's not something that's done by a program person like me that I solely just say, hey, I think I'm not going to make this competitive. We have to be transparent about the money that we are responsible for as a state entity. And so if we're not going to make it competitive, we have to follow the regulations with GATA and ask for an exception and to justify, to cite the regulations why we don't think this should be competitive. So you're going to, in a NOFO, get all the information that you need in order to complete an application. That's your best source of information. When I refer to sections that all of us have to follow, because that's what's in 2 CFR 200, the appendix, here's what it looks like. Program description, we're going to put right up front at the beginning of the NOFO what this program is about. You're going to look at that and decide, yep, this is exactly what we've been doing without any state funding. Or this is something I think we could do because, again, it fits in with our experiences and our history of an agency and the overall mission of why we exist. You're going to look at the funding information, and it will have information in there such as, is there a match requirement? Because that can be a deciding factor. You know, if you're going to get $100,000 from a state agency, but you also have to match it with, 25% of other funds, that may be something that's reasonable for your organization, and for others, it may not be. Obviously, eligibility information, it's bolded because it's so important. Don't want you to waste time putting together an application for something that you are not eligible for. Perhaps an example of that might be a NOFO that is only for federally qualified health centers, or you have to have a certain type of certification or accreditation. So you want to zoom in on that before you put any words on paper in terms of an application. And then it goes on. I think most of these are pretty self-explanatory, but just to give you an idea, this is the consistency you're going to see across NOFOs. I already mentioned about eligibility information being so important, but I want to highlight this last section, which is on the submission information. You need to know what has to be submitted, how do I submit it, and who do I submit it to? And most important is, when is it due? The date and the time. It breaks my heart when I see someone submit an application and they are an hour past the deadline. That is one of those, lines in the sand. We have to comply. So it's fair, right? So it's fair to everyone, that those that got the grant in early, those that got it in time, that someone cannot submit it, a day later. And so you want to make sure you have that earmarked. In fact, when you get that NOFO and you're looking at it, start creating a timeline. If it's due on this date, and we want to submit it, let's say, a day early, just to make sure there's no technical problems. So work backwards. When do I need to turn in the application to the board so they can approve it, if that's your agency process? Or when do I need to, get certain information in order to include it in the application packet? Now, what kind of things might be a part of a NOFO or an application packet? Pretty self-explanatory here. The executive summary tends to be, a 1-2 page document at the front of an application. It's not required, as part of the content in all NOFOs, but you may see that it's a common enough theme that I put that out there for you. So, this is your chance to, in a nutshell, sum up your organization. There'll be guidelines in the NOFO of what's to be included in the summary. And in fact, in all of these areas, it's going to spell out to you what you need to include, what format it needs to be done. And that's where you may get some technical things. It can only be submitted on a PDF, or it has to have 1-inch margins, or here's the font that needs to be used. Those types of things may be there, and I encourage you to follow those. And then many NOFOs have additional attachments for you to upload. So be sure to pay attention. I see more and more NOFOs that have a checklist, and that's a great thing, because that's a tool you can use to make sure you included all components. Because if it's something that is scored, now you'll know what's scored and what isn't, because we're telling you that as a part of the application or part of the NOFO. But so you want to make sure you don't inadvertently not attach a required document and then lose 5 points or 10 points or whatever may be assigned to that area. Now, this is specific to DHS. We have a CSA system, or community service agreement tracking system, and that's how we issue grants. That's how we approve budgets. Now, you may or may not have to do that as a part of your application. Some program areas will have you submit a budget that's on a template, like an Excel template or a PDF, and others will ask you to upload it actually into the CSA system, which you see the link right here. If you're asked to submit it into the CSA system, again, I encourage you to start this as soon as possible, because it does have a couple steps. You start the registration process, and then you need to get an invitation code in order to upload or put entry of data into it. So again, that's a starting early. I mentioned just a few minutes ago about the scoring. This is just an example of what you might see in the NOFO, whether it's in a table like this or in some other format, doesn't really matter. The fact is, we're going to tell you how it's scored. So like, for example, if I look at this one, I see the quality or the description of the program or the services is worth 40 points. So it's more than anything else. I'm probably going to put the most amount of effort into that area, because that can be a make or break category when it comes to scoring. You'll also be told, other things that might influence scoring, if there's any priority points, or if there's any geographic priority areas, those types of things. And this may not be a new information, but I want to close this section by just sharing a couple tips. If you pull down the NOFO, I encourage you to read through the entire NOFO, because you kind of get the high level understanding of the NOFO. Then go back and look at each section, reviewing it in detail. And then you can divide up the work for staff on who's going to complete what, and make that in sync with that timeline I talked about just a minute ago, of working backwards from the day that the deadline is due. And again, trying to get it in a day early if possible. Now, one of the things that it's important to know is, as a part of NOFOs, there is a section in there that tells you how to submit questions. And that's important, because if you get hung up on something, you want to reach out to the program contact to get your question answered, so that doesn't hang you up from moving forward with your application. Generally speaking, in DHS, we put our questions and answers on the website, so that way if one applicant submits an email with a question, I can post it out there for everybody to see the question, not who sent it in, but the question itself, and then what the answer was. Because if one entity has that question, maybe it wasn't clear enough in the NOFO, probably others do as well. I also encourage you to remember, if I'm the one reading your grant and I don't know your organization, the only thing I have to score on is what you've written. So you can't assume, that a reviewer knows, what's going on. So boast, be comprehensive, provide detail. One way to make sure that's done is to ask someone who doesn't know your agency, doesn't know your program, they're a neutral party, to review it. And double check. Use that checklist if there's one in there to make sure you have all components. Follow the instructions to the T. Make sure you meet all the requirements. You know, a lot of times the narrative will be broken down with subsections or criteria. Double check to make sure you've gotten all of those. And then you'll be in great shape. And here we are. At the end, that is a quick overview, a speed test through the whole process. And I know at this point, what I want to leave you with is that when I said on a specific condition, I might ask somebody or dictate to someone through the Uniform Grant Agreement that they use this resource, and it's right on the DHS website. And as you can see, it does. It starts from preparing to apply for a grant all the way to wrapping up the grant award or the project. So that's a great resource that you can use. It's interactive. Basically, if I was online right now, what I would be doing is clicking on each one of those, and that would take me through each of the 5 steps that are required as a part of pre-qualification. So here's where you go in order to get that information.